We're talking with Arlene McCullum, a veteran member of Trinity Church. Arlene, over 10 years ago, you began serving in one of our youth mission experiences, the trip to Washington, D.C. Why did you begin offering your service in that way?
Honestly, because I was asked. There was a need. They needed an advisor. I like Washington, D.C. I love the youth. The age group is great for me, and I said yes.
And your first experience of serving, what was that like? Can you recall?
I did not know what to expect. I didn't know what I was going to offer. I didn't know that I had anything to offer, and that's the scariest part. And then you get there and you just figure it out. There's a need and you just do. It's amazing.
That's a ministry to the homeless. Had you had any experience working with the homeless?
No, never before. That, I think, was the scariest part. And honestly, when I was asked, I really wasn't sure. I thought we were working in soup kitchens or food pantries. And then I realized we were going out on the streets and we were actually going to have interaction with the homeless where we weren't going to be supervised by anybody else. So it was the first time I'd ever done that.
Do you remember the first time you personally had a conversation with a homeless person?
I remember having 3 children standing with me, and they asked me before we went, "Are you afraid?" And I said no, and on the inside I was actually very afraid because I didn't know what I was going to say. And I simply extended my hand and said my name, and God took care of the rest. The conversation went on from there.
And you've done this for over 10 years.
Yes.
Talk about a couple of the significant spiritual moments you've had in this Washington, D.C. mission trip with our youth at Trinity.
2 that really stand out in my mind. The first one was when we were handing out gloves, and there was a young girl, and she handed one of the homeless gentlemen brown gloves. And he said, I don't like brown, can I have the blue ones? And she, with a big smile, 7th grader, said, absolutely, no problem. And she dug in the bag and she handed him the blue ones. And we walked away, and one of the other boys said, that was terrible. He should take what he was given. And I kind of thought to myself, I never admitted this to the youth, but I thought, yeah, we were giving him gloves and he was picky. And this young girl looked up and said, that might be the only decision he was able to make in a long time. And what do you care? You're giving away the blue ones anyway, so what do you care if you give him brown or blue? And I thought, wow, I just learned something major. You give because you give. You don't question why. You don't decide. That's between God and the person. It's not your choice. You serve, and you serve where you're asked to serve.
And the second spiritual moment you recall?
Second spiritual moment was another first-timer to D.C., and we had just learned about the Good Samaritan in church. And we were standing in a park, and it was cold. And I don't even know how the conversation came up, but she said something to me or somebody else about the Good Samaritan. And all of a sudden, a very large homeless man walked over and tapped her on the shoulder and said, well, what is that story about? Never flinched. She looked up at him and she said, it may take a while. I'd like to talk. Have a seat. He sat down on the curb and she told him the whole story, and other homeless people came over, and before I knew it, there she was standing there by herself, telling the story to about 15 different homeless people. She never looked back at me for reassurance. She was never afraid. And I thought, wow, I want to be here when I grow up.
And you continue to serve? Doing what?
I will be going again this year. I continue to serve on the DC Encounter with the Homeless, the youth, going to serve the homeless. I've also done other homeless mission trips, Midnight Run, where we offer clothes and food to the homeless. But my favorite trip is the Washington, D.C. trip because the youth are involved in that and we learn a lot from the youth.
What's it feel like to be the hands and feet of Jesus there?
It feels really great. I think you learn so much more about yourself than you learn about anybody else that you go to serve. And I think that's the beauty. God has a funny way of teaching you things when you least expect it. When you want to learn, you don't learn. It's when you serve, you learn. It's amazing.
And what would you say to the Trinity congregation about service?
I would say, if you want to grow in your faith, serve others, because in serving others, you're serving Jesus. You'll get so much more out of it than you ever give to anybody else. You'd be surprised.